Hello, welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be talking about my 10 most memorable live music moments. I've just changed the title of it. It was going to be called the 10 greatest gigs I ever went to. It could be called that as well. Shall I start again? Hello, welcome to this video, and on this video I will be talking about the 10 greatest gigs I ever went to. So there's that and there's that. You know, some of these aren't necessarily the greatest gigs I went to, though. As I started talking, I switched the camera on. I thought, I looked at the first one and I thought, it's not necessarily the greatest gig I went to, but it's the most memorable. It's in the 10 most memorable. Right? So shall we just get in there? All of these have a story. All of these are gigs I've gone to. Some of them were just great gigs, and that's why I remember them. Some of them have little stories attached, and this first one has a story attached to it at number 10. I've sort of ranked these because I think when I wrote them down it was like, obviously I'm going to put that down number 1, and then I'll definitely put that down number 2, and it did seem to rank down, you know, so I think this is sort of ranked. So at number 10 I have got the time I went to see my hero Billy Cobham at Lake Lucerne in Switzerland in 2000. All right, and the reason why I went to see him because I was playing the same festival with Robert Plant. He was playing, I think, either the night before or it could have been he was on before us. I'm not too sure. I can remember that a few days before we'd done a gig in Naples. And at this gig, they'd closed off the centre of Naples for us. It was a bizarre gig. I can remember driving into Naples, and on every single billboard was a poster of Robert Plant with my face. The band photo was absolutely everywhere. Everywhere I looked, my face was coming out of all the walls. It was a bizarre gig. They closed off the centre of this square. There must have been about 20,000 people in there. Once the audience had got in, we were pretty much trapped inside, and we realised that it was going to be difficult to get Robert out. And those of you who know about rock history will know Naples, it can get a little bit tetchy, you know. There's been a few bands that have ended up in a sort of riot situation, including I think Led Zeppelin at Naples, definitely Frank Zappa. I think that is what is depicted on the is it Man from Utopia album cover? Anyway, I digress. So we're at this gig, and to cut a long story short, because it's not directly relevant, but it was sort of the day before this gig. We had to do a runner out of this gig. You know, we had to jump on the tour bus and act as a decoy while they took Robert out some other way. And I can remember just fans hitting this tour bus and climbing on it while it was being driven out of Naples. And then we had a police escort out. It was proper rock and roll stuff. Police escort out of the town. And then I can remember as we got out, this storm started up and there was lightning bolts coming on. There's people in cars chasing us. We had the motorcycles with their sirens on from trying to get us out. And really incredible. You know, bust out to the middle of nowhere. And I can remember spending the night in some huge mansion somewhere that night. And then the next day we were taken to the airport, and we got in the tiniest plane that I've ever been in my life. I think it was a 10-seater propeller plane, you know, and we took off from there. Or was that Nice? And we flew anyway. It's all part of the same Italian tour. I think that the Nice gig might be. That's another. This is the thing. Once I get into this period in my life, it's pretty crazy. We flew over the Alps and we land in Lake Lucerne at this jazz and blues festival we're playing at. Absolutely incredible. Now I don't know where I'm going, and if anyone's been to Lake Lucerne, it's an incredible place. And when I get there, I walk down into the foyer of the hotel, and who will be sat there but my hero, Billy Cobham. What's Billy doing here? What's Billy Cobham doing here? I ask people, oh, you know, he's playing at the festival. And I remember then Robert saying, do you fancy going and get some fondues? Because we're in Switzerland, and we went out and I was sat eating fondues with Robert Plant, right, telling him that in half an hour Billy Cobham's going to be playing. And he was going, oh, well, yeah, you're not a fan of Billy Cobham, are you? I said, of course I am, he's my hero. We've got to go and see him, Robert. And eventually I nagged, like a little kid, I nagged Robert to go and see Billy Cobham. And I went with Robert to see Billy Cobham, and it was an incredible experience. I remember Robert actually was quite It's not his thing. Robert, jazz fusion is not Robert's thing. But he was impressed by it. And in a radio interview, he mentioned, the fact that I'd taken him to see Billy Cobham. But for me, this was the first time seeing my hero live. And I got to see him in an incredible, stood next to the greatest rock vocalist in history, which is an incredible thing. It's an incredible thing to experience. When the gig was over, we went back to the hotel. I walked in, I bought myself a drink, and I sat down. And who would come and sit next to me but Billy Cobham? And I looked round at him and I thought, there is nothing I can say to this guy that's not going to make me look like an absolute idiot. And I sat there frozen to the spot. Now this story does go on. And if you want to check it out, there's a video, and the link will be somewhere, I think, where I talk about the two other times I then met Billy Cobham. Fate has tried to throw us together every time, and I'll tell you what happens then. But that is my number 10. It was me seeing Billy Cobham at Lake Lucerne in an incredible situation, right where I was, playing with my idol and getting to play on the same bill as my idol and stay in the same hotel. What a life. What a thing to have done. This is what you look back on when you're old. The aforementioned Nice Jazz Festival, this is my number 9 now. The aforementioned Nice Jazz Festival, this is where I played with Robert again in 2000. That was a stressful gig for me. It's nothing like, playing Nice Jazz Festival. I think we were headlining. We were on the Saturday night, so we're headlining above Pat Metheny, Herbie Hancock, Michael Brecker, just the absolute greats. And I can remember getting freaked out by this. What the hell is a drummer like me doing on a gig like this? I can remember they got we were doing the gig with the Steve Cropper band, basically Booker T and the MGs, with the incredible Keith Carlock on drums. And I didn't know who he was. I can remember watching Keith and just being like, what the hell's this? Why am I doing here? This is bonkers. I can remember they'd lost all my luggage, so I had no clothes or anything. I think I had a toothbrush and my drumsticks. That was about it. When the gig was all over, and I remember then we got our stuff from the airport, all our missing luggage, and it was going dark. And again, I went for a wander with Robert, and in another part of the venue outside was the Count Basie band, right? And they were playing in this sort of Olive Grove or somewhere outside. It was a beautiful warm night in Nice. No PA. We're listening to a live band. We're listening to the power of a jazz big band. There is nothing like the power of a jazz big band when you're hearing it acoustically. We are so used to stuff coming through speakers. We go and see, we say we go and see something live, and it is live, but it's live through electricity and through a set of speakers. I can remember, and it's not on the list, and maybe it should be. I can remember I once was in a band that opened up for Eric Clapton, and I was able to sneak down the side of the stage and put my ear against Clapton's amp while he was playing, actually hear Clapton's sound coming from the amp, not coming down through the amp through a microphone and then into a recording system or PA system and then to my ears. I heard the actual raw Clapton sound coming from that amp. And this Count Basie band was like this times 10. You suddenly realise the technology of a big band, and so many big bands are now echoes of what went before, and even this band was an echo of what went before, but it did have a lineage to the great Count Basie band. Count Basie's big band in the 30s, that's the game changer. Joe Jones and that rhythm section, they changed music. They created grooves. They created bassline piano drums as a rhythm section. Joe Jones started keeping up time on the hi-hats. You got a walking bass line. When you go back to those recordings, that's rock and roll, that's rock music, that's rhythm and blues. It's all contained in that Count Basie big band, that Kansas City big band sound. That's it. That's the beginning of it. That's the end of it. That's everything. That's why we're here. That's why you're here. We're here because of Louis. We're here because of Duke. We're here because of Count Basie. We're here because of Charlie Christian. Right, that's why we're here. We're here because of Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young. We're here because of George Gershwin. We're here because of Count Basie. We're here because of Count Basie's big band. We're here because of that sound, the unadulterated sound. right? And I heard it in Nice on a summer night, stood next to Robert Plant, and it was astonishing. I looked round at Robert's face, he was astonished by it. He was so moved by this sound. This is where it's all at. It's in the blues, it's in, you know, Blind Levin Jefferson, it's in Robert Johnson, it's in, Charlie Patton. Right, it's the source. It's where we all come from. And I heard it that night. It moves me. It moves me more than anything. It moves me so much. And that's what I've got at number 9. Seeing the Count Basie Band at Nice Jazz Festival in year 2000. Right. In 1994, I went to the Phoenix Festival, which was a great little festival that ran in the sort of South Midlands in the UK in the early 90s. I think it was either 93 or 94. It was an incredible lineup, you know. Faith No More played there. I can remember seeing Hole. I saw Pot Will Eat Itself. It was a great lineup. I think, you know, a whole host of people were on. Cardiacs were on. A whole host of people were on. What is the most memorable? And I saw, God, who do I remember seeing there? I saw a couple of hip hop bands. I saw House of Pain. I saw Far Side. I saw Courtney Pine. I spent most of my time in the jazz tent, to be honest. I saw the Disposable Heroes of Hipocrisy. My God, that was a gig, and that was the second best gig, I think, that I saw. They came out with these sort of chainsaws, and they were grinding this metal, and it was just this sort of industrial hip-hop, incredible. Disposable Heroes of Hipocrisy. I think they nearly won it, except that on the same bill was the great Gil Scott-Heron. And that's, I can remember going in on one of the nights, cramming into a tent, it wasn't main stage, and Gil Scott came out and started telling stories and started playing music, and it was a cross between a sort of poetry, jazz, heavy groove, and storytelling. It was absolutely incredible. I was so impressed seeing this that straight away I heard that Gil Scott-Heron was coming back to the UK a few months later, and I bought tickets, and this was at Ronnie Scott's. It was at Ronnie Scott's in Birmingham, and I can remember going down to that gig and sitting there and then being told that Gil Scott-Heron had not managed to get into the country. I can't remember whether he was ill or whether it was some sort of drugs thing. Of course, a few years later, Gil Scott-Heron was dead. This guy was an utter genius. You know, he was a pioneer. He was a poet. He was an incredible musician. You know, he really was one of the greats. And I count myself very lucky to have seen someone of that era, of that heaviness, you know, that I was able to see him live with my own eyes. And a lot of this on this list, you know, we're looking 30 years later now nearly. A lot of these people are gone, and you know these people have gone into history. And those of us who managed to see these people, you know, it's a very important thing. You know, we're all getting older, and at some point this will all be gone and forgotten, because in the end music is something that just disappears into the ether. Right, so and one of the artists I just mentioned was Courtney Pine. I remember seeing Courtney Pine at Phoenix Festival. By that time, Courtney Pine had become, his ear had become tuned into what was commercial in terms of his world, in terms of what he'd pioneered. Courtney Pine is a jazz saxophone player that emerged in the mid-80s. He came out of that sort of jazz sort of resurgence that has happened in the US with Wynton Marsalis. And in the UK, there was a big, you know, jazz resurgence, which went mainstream, and you had people like Steve Williamson, Andy Shepherd, you know, Tommy Smith, was that his name? But the biggest guy of them all was Courtney Pine. Courtney Pine had like documentaries on him. He released, you know, tracks that got in the charts. He was on like Wogan, the talk show. You know, he was mainstream. But that first album's a heavy album. There'd been a big tradition within jazz education in the UK where artists had come up through sort of big bands. And at the time we had Loose Tubes, this is another band, and they were a big band. But small group work in terms of jazz had sort of died away. And Courtney Pine brought that back. It was a whole host of musicians that were really interested in working in small groups. And my God, Courtney Pine had this group, and I saw him around about 88, 89, and it was a game changer for me. And what really changed it for me was the drummer, Mark Mondesir, the great Mark Mondesir. I had come up through heavy metal. I was interested in, heavyweight drumming. I was interested in John Bonham and Ian Pace and all that type of stuff. I was interested in prog drumming, and I was interested in jazz fusion, but I was also listening to Elvin Jones and Jack DeJohnette. My dad had brought me up on, Joe Morello and Buddy Rich. I was also a big fan of Art Blakey when I was growing up. So I had all these influences. The sort of tippy-tappy jazz approach that was so prevalent in the UK at that time, I did not feel I was a part of. And so I didn't think there was any way I could really play jazz. I played double bass drum pedal. I was coming from somewhere else. Courtney Pine came out of an area where he was channeling, at that point in the late 80s, a sort of modal Coltrane approach to jazz. The way Mark Mondesir took contemporary jazz fusion drumming, rock drumming, and also Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, and that drumming, and put it all together at that point in that band was absolutely a game changer for me. And it wasn't just Mark's incredible innovation of doing that, but it was also his virtuosity. I really believe at that point he was one of the most virtuoso drummers on the planet, and I still believe that he is one of the most virtuoso on the planet. People like Dennis Chambers would just turn around and go, look at what this guy's doing. He's an absolutely incredible drummer. So seeing Courtney Pine in 94, I didn't see that at all, but seeing him in 88, 89, I'm not too sure when it was. It was at a theatre in Birmingham. That was a game changer for me. That's where I started to see that I could be a jazz drummer in my way. I could pull all these influences together, and I think it was just the experience of seeing Mark Mondesir live. It was actually, I had to be in the same room as him and see someone actually doing it in front of your very eyes. That was the thing that really did it for me. He then formed a trio, which I sort of followed round and I would watch, avidly. I know Mark watches this channel. I hope he's watching this. Hello, Mark, if you're watching this. You're going to get mentioned every few months. I will bring you up on this channel. It won't ever go. And if he is watching this, I hope he's enjoying this. And but he got in touch and we did meet up a few months ago, and so I've been able just to inform this little bit talk by some of the stuff he said as well. Especially the stuff about these group of musicians being interested in small group jazz, which I think is a thing that hasn't necessarily been mentioned. So let's go from jazz to the other extreme. At number 6, I have the Dave Lee Roth Band at the Monsters of Rock Festival at Castle Donington in 1988. Right, this gig is a memorable gig, but not necessarily for positive reasons. By 1988, me and my mate Matt Bourne, who I was at art college with, we were huge music fans. We were huge rock fans. We were huge Steve Vai fans. And we were desperate to see Steve Vai with the Dave Lee Roth Band. So we heard he was on the Monsters of Rock Festival, so we bought tickets. On the bill with Dave Lee Roth, I think, were Kiss, Guns N' Roses, Iron Maiden, Halloween. That's about as much as I can remember. The gig itself has gone down sort of historically because 2 people were crushed to death in the Guns N' Roses set. At the time, we didn't know that. I can remember being at the back when that happened, and I can remember Axl Rose, who had not impressed me at all, even though they were out playing the sort of Appetite for Destruction album. I wasn't particularly impressed by what he did. I think I was just sat there waiting for David Lee Roth to come out. So once we knew David Lee Roth was on, not knowing that people had been crushed to death, we pushed our way, me and Matt pushed our way steadily through the crowd like this, steadily all the way through, with people punching us as we pushed our way forward. And by the time David Lee Roth hit the stage, we were virtually at the front in this crush. I didn't care. because out came the David Lee Roth Band, and out came Steve Vai, and Steve Vai was just astonishing. David Lee Roth had him by the hair, was pulling him around, he was thrown up here, thrown across there. He never seemed to be touching the guitar. It was all around, spinning around his head while they went through that classic album, with the great Greg Bissonette on drums, who a few years later I sort of palled up with on a few clinics that we did together, and I was able to sort of sit and tell Greg what an influence he'd been, and sort of shake his hand and call him the Prince of Pound, the King of Heavy Artillery. Oh, what a drummer. Greg Bissonette had come from this sort of big band background, this fusion band, comes into the David Lee Roth Band and just kills it. He just kills it. I don't think Billy Sheehan was on that gig. I think it was Matt Bissonette perhaps on bass. Absolutely incredible. And the whole time this was going on, and I was just in this, oh my God, this is the best gig ever. We were stepping all over people that were being just sucked into the mud below. It was an incredible situation. And Matt, I can remember, at one point he was there, the next minute he was gone, and I didn't know where he was gone. And I can remember, once the gig was over, I made my way back, and as I was walking back, I was like, where's Matt? And there's 100,000 people there. We're walking around, where's my mate Matt? And eventually I see him just stood there in a daze, and apparently he'd been pulled out of this crowd, hosed down with a pipe, so he woke up there with a hose pipe, and then just chucked back out, This is back in the 1980s. Health and safety did not matter. We eventually got home very late, the next morning, and went to bed. And I can remember I was stopping at Matt's that night, and as we put the radio on, we'd heard that 2 people, I think, had been killed in that crush. Absolutely unbelievable. A terrible thing. Unbelievable. So that's what I've got. Number 6 is Dave Lee Roth at Donington, 1988. At number 5, I have simply one of the greatest gigs I've ever been to in my life, musically. Right? It doesn't have a story attached to it. It's Alan Holdsworth at the Birmingham Ronnie Scott's, which is now gone, in 1994. He played there with Gary Husband on drums, Gully Severson on bass, Steve Hunt on keyboards, if my memory is correct. I'd seen him before around about 1989 on the Secrets tour, and that was mind-blowing. But this was extra special mind-blowing. Alan came out, went to the bar at half-time, and I managed to go and say hello to him, so I've met Alan that night, which was incredible. At the end of the gig, Alan did a sort of improvisation, then went on for 20 minutes. It started with this sort of spacey stuff, and then it built up, and then he went in sort of almost like a free improvisation. It's perhaps the greatest piece of live music I've seen in my own eyes in my life. It was astonishing. It was stunning. Friends that I'd gone there with were in a daze at the end of it. People couldn't quite pull themselves out of the experience they'd happened once Alan hit left the stage. I can remember when I did talk to him, of course, the whole time he just apologised for, the terrible performance that he was, putting on us that night, which just was not the case. But that's what I got at number 5. I've talked about Alan Holdsworth so much, I will not dwell. But, in terms of musically, if we were just talking about the musical experience I've had, this would be at number 1. But, there's no story there. What's the story of who I got number 4? Well, this is the first gig I ever went to back in 1982 at the age of 14. A huge Motorhead fan I was. Ace of Spades, this made me who I am today, Ace of Spades. And then the next album I awaited eagerly, and they came out with Iron Fist, which I think is the last album of the classic Motorhead, Fast Eddie Clarke, Filthy Animal, Taylor lineup. Iron Fist is a fantastic album. I bought this single Iron Fist the sort of day it came out. I was a huge Motorhead fan. I had a friend called Louise, and she was a Motorhead fan, and we persuaded her dad to take us to see Motorhead up at New Street in Birmingham in 1982, the day that we declared war on Argentina. That was the day. I can remember standing in the queue as a 14-year-old with my friend Louise and her dad, who I can remember just looked like a dad, in a queue of what seemed to be like the most hardest looking Hells Angels on the planet. And we shuffled our way in to this venue, which I think was called the Birmingham Moment. It was on New Street. Everyone will tell me this. Tank came on. They opened up. They were great. First gig I've ever been to. Incredibly loud. Tank were incredibly loud. And then Tank left the stage and it went dark. Right, this is the first proper gig. And there was a rumble. And the lights came up and there was just smoke. No band. And out of the smoke came this iron fist out of the floor. And it opened up, and in the fingers were lights. And through the smoke, as this opened up like this, you saw the light beams go up. And then suddenly this noise, the loudest thing I've ever heard. Till this day, this sound started up, just going through your body. The loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. No band on stage, and you suddenly, the roof descended down on chains, and sat upon it was Motorhead. All of these guys are dead now. I can't believe it. They're all dead, and there they were in 1982, creating this sound. I mean, I was deaf. I can remember going, when we went back home and going back to the car, walking, and I was absolutely completely deaf. I was a bit worried, I wake up the next day and me hearing had come back a little bit. This was incredible. I can remember, just the magnetic charisma of Lemmy. I can remember when the gig finished, he took the mic stand and just broke it apart, smashed it up and threw it on the floor. My first ever gig, Motorhead, this is rock history. This is, why we're all here, because of bands like that. So we've got number 4. At number 3, of course, I have John McLaughlin. I've seen John McLaughlin a number of times. I think I've seen him 3 times. I saw him on the Remembering Shakti tour. I was at the first Remember Shakti album. I was at the Birmingham recording. I'm on that, clapping in the background. I've seen him 4 times. I saw him with the Dennis Chambers, Joey DeFrancesco group, the organ trio. And that's memorable because my friend was actually working for the promoter to put that gig on, and when the gig finished, they needed a lift to the airport, and she said, "There's someone here that will definitely give you a lift to the airport," and then went out to try and find me, and I'd left early. That was my chance to drive Dennis Chambers and John McLaughlin to the airport. I saw his trio with Dominic Piazza and Charlotte Gertu in 91. But the most memorable was the first time I saw John McLaughlin, which was at the concert that became the live album, live at the Royal Festival Hall, which I think ranks as one of his greatest albums of the post-Mahavishnu times. I've just done a video where I discuss the post-Mahavishnu albums, where I sort of get quite deep into that. I know there's a lot of John McLaughlin fans who don't like these albums, and I try and get into why that is and the difference and all that type of stuff. But I think in terms of musical creativity, he was at his peak in the Mahavishnu and Shakti. I think in terms of guitar playing, he was at his peak playing nylon string guitar in that trio. It's a return to form. So that's what I've got at number 3. Is John McLaughlin playing at the Royal Festival in 1989, which you all can go and listen to because it's the Live at Royal Festival Hall CD album. At number 2, from 1988, I have on the Broadway the Hard Way tour, Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa's a complete hero of mine. I'm so glad I got to see him in 1988. I really am. As soon as that tour was announced, I got tickets. He arrived in the UK. He had some write-ups in the paper, which were not generous, of course, because you know what the music press was like. So it was as critical as it was, praise. They couldn't just come out and say this is one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. Of course they couldn't. And so when they described what was going on, I just thought, what's it going to be like? Why are they saying he's bad? I had this all the time, The press saying that something was terrible, then me buying it was brilliant. What's this going to be like? They say he's doing all this political stuff. What's it going to be like? I was worried, and I can remember going up with my mate, getting there early, and then getting out the car, walking towards the NEC where he was playing, and just seeing the weirdest people. and I can remember everyone was carrying around these chickens. You know, I didn't know about the, you know, using the chicken to measure it thing. There was, everyone's bought these chickens, you know. I can remember getting into the NEC, the lights coming down, and as the lights came down, you could see like a Milky Way of orange stars, which were all the joints being smoked by everybody around this venue. And then Frank Zappa hit the stage. And within a matter of minutes, I can remember staring at that stage in astonishment that human beings could play that complex, that tight, you know, completely not what the local press had said at all. It was just monumental. I use that word all the time, but it truly was. It was mind-blowing. And all our favourites were on there, and the stuff we didn't know was just as entertaining. And Frank did long guitar solos, and he spoke and he cracked jokes. And the whole time, I remember he'd released these great big balls, and they were slowly bouncing around the audience. And the ambience in there, I can remember the ambience, and those balls, and Zappa's long modal guitar solo was just like trance-like as these things bounced around the room. I can remember him playing... right at the end, going into Stairway to Heaven, and I was like, what is going on? He's playing Stairway to Heaven, didn't expect this. And I can remember thinking all the way through it, what is he going to do when he gets to the guitar solo? He's not just going to do another guitar solo, has he? What's he going to do? And I can remember the band, just everybody playing note for note Jimmy Page's guitar solo absolutely perfectly over this sort of reggae Stairway to Heaven. The whole thing was it's just so memorable. I have got somewhere back there the program. Shall I go and find it? I don't plan my videos, you know. Anybody else would search this program out, but I think I can see it. Right, here it is. This is what I bought. How many years ago? 34 years ago. I bought this Broadway the Hard Way. That's the program from the gig I went to. Register to vote before it's too late. There's the band. Look at it. He's got his road manager, Dwayne Taylor, stage manager, Ray Upton, engineer, Bob Stone, of course. You know, incredible. And then we've got the lyrics to all the tracks that ended up on the album Broadway the Hard Way. There's a fantastic picture of Scott Tunis and Ike Willis. Chad Wackerman, of course, on drums. Bobby Martin on everything. Incredible vocals, incredible saxophone, incredible keyboard playing. Ed Mann on percussion, and a very young-looking Mike Keneally on stunt guitar. This is, you know, this is what propelled Mike Keneally to fame. And I've just played on an album by the great Fayan Zek. And I think Mike Keneally's on that album, I'm pretty sure. And I've been on a couple of albums with Mike Keneally, which is a wonderful thing. He doesn't know that, but I do. Here we have Walt Fowler and Bruce Fowler. Right. Oh, this is brilliant. I didn't know I was going to pull this out. And look at this. That's exactly what I looked like. That's what it looked like for me, you know. That's just what the NEC looked like. This is the gig. This nearly made number one on the thing. Albert Wing on sax. Paul Carman. They had a whole brass section which enabled him to make this a very orchestral. There's Kurt McKettrick. You know, these are the musicians of the last Zappa band. They sort of get forgotten. Scott Tunis on bass, you know. We have a discography back there and some wonderful pictures of Frank live. Ah, oh, we miss him, don't we? We miss him so much. Of course, the band fell out. Something happened, didn't it? They were arguing about money or whatever it was. And by the time he got to the States, the band was pulled. You know, inspiring the title of the album, one of the albums that came out afterwards, sort of, you know, from that tour. The greatest band you never saw, or whatever it is. You know, whatever it's called. this band didn't last. It could have been the case that I never got to see them. I was so lucky to be in the UK at that time to see my hero Frank Zappa in 1988. So what have I got at number one? Right, in number one, as part of the Birmingham Jazz Festival, in the same venue where I saw Frank Zappa, the Birmingham Jazz Festival put on as a headline for the whole festival the legend that was and is Miles Davis in 1990. I went to see that gig. And of all the gigs I've been to, if there was only one gig I could have been to, it was Miles Davis. Now, of course, Miles Davis, there's a video I did very early on when I set this channel up called The Four Titans. They're the four titans that underpin this channel. John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Frank Zappa, John McLaughlin. And I got to see three of them. Of course, I never went to see Coltrane, and that would have been something else. But I did see Miles Davis live. Miles's music was so integrally rooted in improvisation that to be able to be in the room experiencing that was an incredible thing. It was the late 80s band. I remember it had Foley on lead bass. It had got the guy that's now in Santana on electric bass. I'm not going to go through all the musicians because I know I'm not going to be able to pull them out like that. It was a great band. But what struck me was just the charismatic force of seeing Miles Davis in the flesh live on stage. And the tension that him being there created. This guy created a tension just by being in the room. I can remember the keyboard solo. Keyboardist went into a solo, and this is at the NEC in Birmingham. This is a big venue, so it's not a jazz club. This is a venue that seats around 10,000. I think they shut half of it out, so I think there was about 5,000 people in. Virtually every musician in the Midlands and the UK was in that. I'm sure there's gonna be people that say, yeah, I was at that gig as well, because it just seemed to be, when I remember looking around and I knew everybody that was in there, it seemed. But it was a big venue, and they started to come out and they started to play, and at one point the keyboardist take the solo, and Miles turned his trumpet round because he got that microphone at the end, and he said into the microphone, why do you have to play so goddamn loud? At that moment the keyboardist just stopped. What's happening now? And they looked round, and then he would gesture for someone else to start. Those musicians had to deliver the whole time. It was incredible. It was an incredible gig, and I can remember musically it was astonishing. It was just incredible to be in that environment and hearing that, and there's Miles does something musically that no one else can do. Everyone else blows. Everyone else, they might pull it in, or they might be a play out. They might do it. With Miles, it just seems like he gets the best musicians, puts them into that place, and there's now play, but no bullshit. It just felt like that, and as soon as you started playing anything that was cliched or what you knew or stuff that you'd prepared, he didn't want to know that. He wanted you to push. Miles Davis was an incredible musician, highly trained, Juilliard educated, incredible musician. It doesn't get mentioned. His ears were huge. You can tell that when you listen to the record. His ears were huge. I'm sure he had perfect pitch. I'm sure he had the ability to spot stuff and turn on a dime. He had incredible reaction time, but he also had an incredible vision of what music was about. Towards the end of the gig, they were playing away, and Miles Davis, who was wandering around the stage and doing that whole thing, and he'd done the Michael Jackson stuff and walked down and did all that thing that we were. At some point, he sort of just wandered off the stage, and the band kept jamming, and the band kept jamming, and eventually that jam just sort of petered out, and they sort of walked off the stage. And then I think what happened is that somebody realised that they needed to fulfil a contract. So the drummer came back out. This is what I remember. The drummer came back, or he stayed on and he did a drum solo. He did a drum solo, and then that stopped, and then the percussionist came out and he juggled. He did some juggling, and we all clapped, and then he waved and he went, and then that was the gig over. Never ever have I been to a mainstream gig in an arena that finished in such a fashion. It was absolutely strange. Maybe Miles had had enough and he was gone. But to my ears and my experience, I didn't feel that this was a bad gig. I didn't feel like anything like that. I felt that this was a life-changing moment, you know. And this is the thing about live gigs, they're completely different to recordings. You're in a place, your focus is heightened, and you're in a moment, and that moment's ethereal. You know, if I sit down and listen to the Royal Festival Hall concert by John McLaughlin that I was at, it's nothing like actually being there. It's completely different, right? It's like that's an album. That's like written in stone. We can listen to it and ponder it. A live concert's something else. Let's hope that it does not die. Let's hope that musicians will be able to go out and play. There's so many musicians going out and playing to backing tracks and syncing through tuning devices, and they're not playing. Someone behind the stage is playing for them, or they haven't got any musicians on stage anyway because it's all a laptop. You know, it's like we need to preserve live performance. It's so important. How many people do you know that hate jazz until they go and see it live and they actually experience it in the room? So, you know, let's keep music live. Okay, I've finished. I'm done. If you like the video, like it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. And if you want to know when I'm doing the next video, press the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.